Hi guys, this video is about embryos, which are evidence of evolution. So let's first talk about what an embryo is. An embryo is a baby that's still developing before it's born. Here's a cool picture where you can see what an embryo looks like. So this is 28 days after the sperm has fertilized the egg, and then this one is 32 days and so on. And you can see it's just kind of a bundle of cells at the very beginning, and then it slowly starts to develop from there. And you can see by 44 days you can see like a head and an eye and arms and legs, and it actually has a tail too, which is interesting. So this is what embryos look like, human embryos. So it's a baby that's still developing and it's not born yet. And it doesn't even quite look like a human baby yet either, because it's still developing. And other animals also have embryos. In fact, plants do as well, but we're just going to look at the animal ones. So look at this picture on the left. We have at the top, these are the early embryos. So this is a fish embryo. It's a developing fish before it is born, right? Before it hatches out of its egg. This one is a salamander. We've got a tortoise, a chicken, and then a human, which we already looked at, right? You can see that all of these embryos at the beginning look very similar. In fact, if I covered up the two rows at the bottom, like let's imagine I covered those up and you couldn't see them, you wouldn't be able to guess probably what animal each of these embryos is, because they all look so similar. And the interesting thing is they all have tails too. Like the human embryo has a tail, even though humans, when they're born, don't have tails, right? So embryos all look very similar at the beginning of their development, but then later they become different. You can see here, this is the fetus. So fetus is after embryo when it's more developed. Look at this. If I asked you to tell me what animal each of these are, you probably could actually. Look at the tortoise. It totally looks like a baby tortoise, right? So once they've developed more, they have more traits that their species has, but at the beginning, they all pretty much look the same no matter what species they are, right? Let's look at this picture here on the right. This is also similar. You can see how similar all the embryos look at the beginning versus at the end of their development. Okay, next one. Okay, so since all embryos are very similar at the beginning of their development, this is actually evidence of evolution. It's evidence that we have a common ancestor with these animals. So let's look at these embryos here. There's a human embryo, a bird embryo, a reptile, and a fish. They're sort of different, but they look very similar. The most important thing is they all have gill slits, and they all have a tail, which is weird because humans, when we're born, we don't have a tail or gills. We breathe with our lungs, right? A bird also, well, it has a tail, but a bird also doesn't have gills when it's born. So it's interesting that embryos all have gill slits and a tail before they're born. And it's not by accident. It's actually because we came from a common ancestor. And our common ancestor a long, long, long time ago, before humans existed, had gills and a tail because it probably lived in the water, right? Those are adaptations to help live in the water. And then over time, that common ancestor changed. It adapted to a different environment, right? So let's say we have a population of our common ancestor that lives in the water. It's got gills and a tail. Part of that population maybe moves onto land. Maybe part of that population stays in the water. And then on land, maybe they go to different environments, right? So that whole population of our common ancestor from like millions of years ago separated into different populations, and those different populations changed. They evolved differently. And that's why we're also different today, right? Fish are very different from birds and reptiles and humans, and that's because they live in a different environment from us. But in the past, we all came from the same ancestor, the same animal, a really, really, really long time ago. And embryos are evidence of that because we still have gill slits and a tail as we develop, then we lose them because we don't need them in our environment where we live, right? So embryos are evidence of evolution. And there's my image sources, so I hope that was helpful. Good luck on the test.